Welcome back to Left Behind Natives. Today we're sitting down with Dr. Pullen to explore a question that touches the hearts of so many of us. What does Native identity really mean? For some people, identity is something that they've known and lived since childhood. For others, it's something discovered later in life, maybe through family stories, DNA tests, or moments of recognition that changes everything. But that discovery also raised difficult questions. Am I Native enough? And what happens in, say, my own community doesn't see me that way? What if they feel me, to be another way? What role does politics play when a tribe themselves can decide who belongs and who doesn't? Here in the South especially, so many families carry Native ancestry, sometimes hidden, sometimes denied, sometimes dismissed as just a story. But today we're going to talk to Dr. Pullen about these complexities, the struggle to belong, and the healing that can come from embracing who it is that you are. So if I can ask you, Dr. Pullen, go ahead and introduce yourself just to let everybody know who you are here on Left Behind Natives.
Thank you, Charlie. I'm Robert Pullen. I'm a retired professor. I taught for 36 years at Troy University. To go a little further back, I was a Baptist preacher for 20 years. I've been a counselor and a little bit of everything, but teaching is the core of my calling in life. When I was in my 40s, a family story that had always drifted around. My maternal grandmother was rumored to be Cherokee, but it was never talked about. In Southwest Georgia, where I grew up, being Indian was not something to be proud of. And so, but after my grandmother died, I said something to my mama about grandmother being Cherokee, and she said, "Oh no, she was Creek. Our family was Creek," and I just got chill bumps all over. It was a life-changing moment, and so I began to. Had always been fascinated by the Native American cultures of the Southeast. In fact, I intended to be an archaeologist and wound up in sociology instead, but I always read and did research in that area because I just felt called to it. And then when I found out that we had pretty strong Creek ancestry from people there in Southwest Georgia, I started looking for connection with a tribe that could help me to learn about my culture. And it took me 4 or 5 years to find somebody that I thought had something to offer and was willing to fool with me. And that's been about 25 years ago. And so I have worked and been a member of several tribes, spent time out in Oklahoma with one of the federal tribes. They adopted me and gave me a name and a clan, and taught me a lot, and so this has been I'd say the core of my identity, and both professional and now that I'm retired, my avocational interests is in Mvskoke, the Mvskoke way, and have tried to walk that and worked with several different tribes in teaching, helping, learning role.
Yeah, if I could interject, just noticing from everything that I've read about you and knowing what you do with your tribe, of course, Chief Michelle Gilmore was very happy to recommend I interview you for this podcast, which I'm very glad I did interview her and have accepted this, and I'm looking forward to a few others that she's recommended. But to be honest with you, it looks to me, if I can just say, that after you retired from your actual job that you were working, now's when you actually started doing a lot of really amazing work. I've seen a lot of the progress once again that your tribe has made, which I admire deeply. And I even said during Chief Michelle's interview that if there was one group that I could say should be the cookie cutter template, that any organization, I mean that from beginning to end, everything I've seen it's been miraculous. And I think that's the same word that I used last time. So, a lot of times in my experience, and I don't often talk about the spirit and how things work. I have kind of a unique perspective, a little different than what we were talking about at the beginning before we started the episode, but I have a unique perspective of how the flow of reality and time and everything exists. But I really feel like that now that you're doing this, now you're doing the good hard work that
Yeah.
I very much admire. I appreciate the other jobs you've done in life, and thinking back to my childhood, talking about not being an archaeologist. Gosh, I hated archaeologists when I was a kid. I
Yeah.
really did. I had some run-ins with them on some different levels. Once again, maybe in my memoirs I'll mention them, but in any case, my daughter went to school for anthropology, and so I see that now as having a Native American in the field being kind of our way to be heard and to be seen. And so that is important. But I think looking at it from a certain perspective, there could be some positive that might be a field that Indian people really need to more consider than not. But anyway. If you don't mind my asking about defining identity, from your perspective, what does Native identity actually mean? Is it cultural, spiritual? Is it legal, ancestral, or a combination of those?
Well, I think it can be all of those. The depends on who you talk to and what kind of point they're trying to make, or maybe axe they're trying to grind.
Yeah.
As a social scientist, I learned about identity and identity politics, and one of the key elements of establishing identity in human societies is who you're not. Who you are often is secondary to who you're not, and
Right.
that sets up the kinds of tensions and disagreements that tend to drive the discussions about identity, which I think is unfortunate. I've encountered that, of course, in my journey, and sometimes have to deal with other people's definitions of what I am not, who I am not. But my effort has been, since I started this journey, 25 years ago, is to be positive and to be engaged in something that is spiritually vital, culturally appropriate, and personally uplifting. The history of our native people is so filled with strife and conflict and unfairness and genocide and warfare and all of that. We would never want to forget the reality of that. Sometimes the arguments about who is who's real, grow out of the leftovers of those kinds of hostilities and negativities.
Mm-hmm. I agree totally.
But I, in my heart of hearts, and this is something one of my teachers said to me, is to be native is to have a red heart. And, you may have a lot of native genes are not many native genes. You may have a lot of experience in the culture, perhaps even from birth, or you may have none whatsoever. You may have studied and learned and traveled with native people, been accepted and taught. You may have a membership in an official native group, but if your heart's not red, then that's all just words on paper. Mm. And some people, some people who have no way to establish a genetic connection deeply feel a nativeness or a call to the fire or a desire to learn and value the culture of Native American people.
Yeah, I think I can understand what you're saying there. I've seen some of the strife. Now, let me foreshadow a little bit of my childhood. I've seen some of the strife of Native people arguing and fighting against one another. And as a kid, now this again, as a child, from a child's perspective, I would look at them and say, well, that's their non-native side coming out. But truthfully, we also argued and fought, and there's a lot of history. You mentioned Cherokee people. There's a lot of history of two different groups of Cherokee people fighting each other since the 1700s. So that's in there. Eventually, having the opportunity to look at it from a genealogical perspective, and what I mean is enough of these people, enough of their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren show up in my genealogy that I can say, well, wait a minute, this group of people that later on in life, back in the 1800s, were considered the Ross Party, and this group of people that were considered to be the Treaty Party, actually the Treaty Party come from that same group of people that used to be fight. So sometimes these fights are over and over again. One of my favorite things, one of the stories that I tell my kids, especially because the three of them don't really get along together really well, as most kids, your children don't always get along well. I wish they did, but whether that's hidden animosity or out in the open like mine are, you still, as a parent, you want your kids to get along, so I tell them this story that the mothers and fathers, and especially in Brazil, but in a lot of South American areas, tell their kids about. Historically, there were two brothers that had two different tribes that were fighting against one another, and they never really had any major battles or anything. They were just against one another, and eventually when the Europeans came over, that they joined with one of those brothers and helped them overthrow the other brother, and that's the whole reason that we have Europeans in the Americas today. And that's a story that a lot of South American moms tell their kids, and my wife and I have shared that with our kids on numerous occasions, hoping that one day that they get the idea. But regardless, the end game as an advanced being is for us all to get along.
Sure.
So it's a real shame that we have any of these divides. And I have found myself lately repeating something that Western Indians have been saying the whole time, is that we're all related. And oftentimes when I see somebody as, any of the previous mentioned chiefs or even current chiefs that are still around today, I can see them in my genealogical lines these days. I know that we're cousins and we are all related. It's true. Right. So growing up without knowing, though, that if someone grows up in a Native community but doesn't know that they're Native or doesn't identify as Native, or later discovers their heritage, are they still Native enough? Is that somebody that, how would we be able to judge that?
Well, that's that again, I think depends on where you stand or where you sit. There's no one definition of what it means to be Native. My experience of entering into a more conscious awareness of Native identity, I think is not uncommon in the South, where there is that hidden genetic cultural element that has been deeply buried for survival purposes. The people who stayed behind had to survive, and they could not survive as native people. In fact, the southern states generally defined native people out of existence. We have no native people here. They're all either dead or gone to Oklahoma, and the ones who were left behind realized that their fate was that as well. Personally, I grew up very white, rural Southern. There was the rumor of native ancestors. As I got older and a little more education, I realized that most of us who grew up in the rural South, whose families were here in the 17 or 1800s, would have had native ancestors as part of that gene pool. But it just was, it was an undercurrent that was a part of my identity from the time I was old enough to walk out in the fields, in the woods, to sit in the dirt or go down in the swamps. I felt that connection, even though I perhaps would not have articulated it like that early along. But I learned a concept later that reached back to make sense to me of how that identity was formed. It's the idea of sacred geography.
Absolutely.
There's, you have the geography that you can see, but there's also at a deeper level a connection to the land for people whose ancestors lived on it. That is deeper than anything you can put on a map. And I certainly felt that, and still feel that. The first, when I finally found a tribe that would take me in and teach me back in midlife, when I pulled through the gate and down through the little woods road and came up onto the grounds, it was an epiphany experience. I mean, I knew I was home. The trees looked right. The ground smelled right. The bugs that were crawling around the ground were the right bugs. And I thought, oh, dear Lord, I hope these people will accept me, because this is what I've been looking for. And I think I knew that because of the dreams I'd had even as a child, the experiences that I had, the time spent on the land as a rural farm boy. It was, the identity was there before I knew what to call it.
Right.
There's a part of identity where you want that to be recognized by other people. We want to be accepted and named in instead of pushed out. And I realized that the people who had struggled as identified Native people and the horrors that they went through, they have the right to have their say. Some of my Oklahoma friends said that those Mvskoke people who were your ancestors abandoned the people and stayed behind. And okay, you went on the Trail of Tears and you endured the horrors of us being uprooted and transplanted in that sorry, rocky country of Oklahoma. And you have every reason in the world to be upset and unhappy with everybody, including me. So that you have the right to say that and to feel that. But I have to find a place that satisfies my need to be identified with the people. And so perhaps there was some sense in which my ancestors abandoned the people by surviving here as best they could. It was very gratifying to find people in Oklahoma who would accept me, would include me, and say, yes, you are one of us. Now, that wasn't everybody. And even within the state, and the state recognized tribes, those conflicts about, are you Indian enough to be Indian? Right. I look pretty white. The folks, my folks out in Oklahoma adopted me, named me Podole Hudki, which means white wind. And I could feel when they would introduce me to new people, we'd visit a new community, there were always those who would stand back and say, "What's that big white fella doing out here? What right does he have to be here? Why doesn't he go away?" And even the name recognized, I felt, that tension. It's not an easy problem to solve. I think you have to settle it inside yourself. What you feel in your connection with the culture, with the land, with the history, with the hopes for the future, for your people and for yourself, and be willing to accept that others will define you in ways that are comfortable for them. And I give them that right and privilege because I know who I am.
Right.
Whether they know it or not.
Well, Dr. Pullen, I tell you what, I admire that because I know, after having lived in Oklahoma for a while myself, and good friends once again on both sides of the fence, and even being ostracized by people who I assumed liked me while I lived there, and telling me that I should have been in Muskogee, Oklahoma instead of where I was at. because the people in Muskogee had ideas that I had and what have you. It's just where I grew up, I don't want to mislead anybody. I didn't grow up in Muskogee, Oklahoma, but having grown up in the part of the South that I did, and spending time with, and as I've told you, I've got cousins that are members of Federal Muskogee tribe, or Federal Creek Indian tribe. Having grown up where I did, that's how I was used to seeing things move. So even out there amongst my own people, I was always told that I would have been better off over here with these other people, so I know what you mean there. And it took me a while too to figure out, how to accept myself for who I am. As a kid, I wanted to study my mom's people's language because I felt like it was very important and significant. And once in a while, there's somebody here or there that'll contact me. I even had somebody in my business email me from Europe the other day and asked me to translate something, which I'm like, have you thought about contacting this college or that college instead of asking me, because they're more of an authority on this. But when I studied my mom's people's language, I thought, this is important, it's significant. And there was a time that I had really wanted to study Cherokee, and while I lived around Cherokee people and I've heard it spoken for so long, I have read a lot of it, I have a hard time, getting a bite into it, making myself interested. German is my second language. I studied Mandarin Chinese right out of high school and college for 4 years. I don't speak Chinese. My Chinese is really bad. It's what would they say? It's Bu Tai Wei. It's not very good anyway. But anyway, I also see, the benefit of understanding your own people's language. I'm always reminded of a movie that I enjoyed, The Mummy with Brendan Fraser. And one of the guys in there was wearing a bunch of necklaces just in case he met his maker, and his maker was the one from this group or that group or this group. So, I've spent a lot of time learning the languages that all of my people speak. As a matter of fact, like I told Chief Gilmore, on my phone, I keep a 1940s reprint of a Muskogee dictionary. And it's got old Muskogee words on them. I'm always admired, old language, because the way things change, I don't know if you know about it or not, but the Cherokee Nation, for example, even has a group that incorporates new words into the language, because, we've got
people do that
a lot.
Too.
Yeah.
There's a group. I have friends on that group that are making words for television, for example.
Oh, sure. Well, back in the old days, the Sioux language, for example, there were only about 300 words in the whole language,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And then later on, they had, after meeting Europeans, there were about 600 words because they had new words, mostly dirty words and words for airplane and car and TV and stuff like that. Um, but um, but I'm always, like I said, I always admire the old languages. And so I study Norwegian. I've been studying it for about 3.5 years. I study Portuguese. I'm around Portuguese speaking people often, people from Brazil. I speak Spanish with relative fluency, same with German. And I look at all these things, and I've gotten to the point, like I told you, I'm 52, so I'm sitting back thinking, I've got one son who speaks Japanese fluently, and he understands Spanish because he's been around my wife and I for all his life. And then my daughter, who used to be very fluent in a couple of other languages, kind of set them down and only uses them when she has to. She translates when people ask her something in Spanish. And then my youngest boy, who, once again, like the other two, have been around us long enough that Spanish is really their second language, but he studies Russian and he's really good at it. But he just, I don't know. I think sometimes we get bored with those things as kids, and if you have the foresight or the drive, I guess, to make you keep studying this kind of stuff, eventually you get to where I'm sitting today, and I can set it all down and just not even talk to anybody anymore, and still have these chats with my Creator and with my ancestors that I have on a daily basis. So you get to a point where
Well, I think
you
I'm
can
glad
see
you
through
mentioned
the veils
language.
of all these.
I think I lost you. Are you back?
Oh, okay. No,
Uh,
I think I'm back. Do you see me okay?
okay. Yeah. Well, I'm glad you mentioned language because it is crucial. I think you can't understand an indigenous people if you don't at least have some exposure to their language, because the language captures a different world that you live in.
Mm-hmm.
And I have studied the Muskogee language since I started this journey. I realized about 10 years in, my old brain was not going to ever allow me to be fluent. If you have the gift of learning the language when you're a child, and you have a community that keeps the language alive by allowing you to speak it, that's great. If not, then you have to just do the best you can. I try to use the language as much as I can in ceremonial situations, in prayers. I do a lot of work with medicine, and so it's important for me to know the Muskogee names for the plants that are a part of our ceremonial and healing medicines. And so, I'm not fluent by any means. I can listen to Muskogee people speak and maybe pick up a third of what they're saying, but I don't speak the language. I respect the language, and I use it, and it helps me to understand the past and understand the culture.
Yeah, I definitely agree, and certainly a good direction to go with that by all means. Now, just finishing up on our last question, a lot of times with Native identity and ancestry, it's hidden, forgotten. To be honest with you, something I wanted to say while you were speaking about growing up in South Georgia is that, Native people actually built the South. For whatever it is today, we had a big part of it. And some of that was beautiful. Some of it was ugly. Some of it was incredibly difficult. Matter of fact, I think that's the one thing I can't say is that none of it was easy, but some of it was definitely difficult. But when I look back over my own family, like I said, and I see people in my ancestry that are Native, and then all of a sudden they're being called white, in some cases black or what have you. They as you said, the South made sure that we were one thing or the other, not the third thing.
Right.
But how would you suggest that individuals approach rediscovering and reclaiming that part of themselves? What's your recommendation?
Well, I would start with the idea that if you're not hearing the call, then it's not an issue for you. Not everybody who is full-blood Native is involved in Native culture. And so, those of us who are a little bit of this and a little bit of that, if I have 3 younger brothers, none of them are interested in the Muskogee way. That's fine. If they're not looking for it, then that's okay. But if that spark is in there, I think the first thing you can do is learn, read, find some Muskogee people who can direct you in your reading and learning. As a professor, you always start with books. It's very important to find a group of people who are practicing the culture who show you what it's like on the ground. That can be the hardest part, because there are many Muskogee communities that are not open, and because of the history, they're not interested in taking people in, and with all the risks that come with that. But if you can find that's great. If not, I know many people who've come into a fuller appreciation of their Muskogee identity by following the powwow trail. Many of the Southeastern groups sponsor powwows. Someone once asked one of our elders, we were on the grounds and we were having ceremonial, doing Muskogee ceremonies, and a visitor asked her, "Is this a powwow?" And she said, "No, powwows are what we do for white people. This is what we do for ourselves."
That's good.
That may not be true in some parts of our country, where the powwow culture is more integrated, I guess, than it's in the Southeast into our identity here. But that's something. And of course, it's important to recognize that is typically a pan-tribal and not necessarily a particularly cultural. It may not, maybe in a Muskogee context, but it may not be showcasing Muskogee culture or a Cherokee context. But it's something. At least it's a way to keep the flame going, because you can't develop an identity unless you are integrated in some way into a community. That's hard. I don't have an easy answer for that. It took me about 5 years to find a community that would take me in. And then after I kind of broke through that barrier, that led to other connections and other communities and other experiences, and eventually to Southeastern Mvskoke Nation, where now I serve as an elder and a teacher. And it's just a very rich and satisfying experience. But a lot of people feel the calling to explore their Native identity and kind of lose enthusiasm because of the difficulty of finding a legitimate, real, cultural, spiritual experience.
Sure. Now, with what you just said, that does lead me into my next question. Speaking of the enthusiasm, now I can show you pictures of. I won't post them on this video, but I can show you pictures of a couple of federally recognized tribes from the South wearing Plains Indian style headdresses.
Oh yeah.
And those things, history is the tell-all, and while we do try to uphold standards, which is a good thing to do, as an advanced creature, we should uphold standards and try to always better ourselves. I can tell you that today, some of those same groups of people that I have pictures of wearing those headdresses that don't belong on them, apparently, uh, they preach against this kind of thing. And so, that having been said, I would like to explore the Cherokee princess narrative. Today, the Cherokee princess narrative is a negative thing, and it is and of course, young Native folks today could easily say that it's always been negative, and I tend to agree. I've been one of those people that in my youth spoke out about such a thing. We didn't have princes and princesses, but I can also tell you that reading so many historical documents as I have, that there was a time when the Europeans come over here and they wanted to see that the people that they associated with were better than the lower class of people that were just all around doing everything. So when they identified a chief, oftentimes they would call him the emperor. I've seen that countless times. They would call him the king.
Right.
As a matter of fact, if you go and translate the word king today in Cherokee, it's the same as the word chief.
Yeah.
So, you know, the words princess and prince and all these different words, they were enforced upon us no differently than the words that I'm using to talk to you with right now.
Sure.
So that having been said, the Cherokee princess narrative today has a very negative connotation, whereas, say, back in the 1700s, it was probably a positive thing to the Europeans, and the Indians didn't know one way or the other that it was going to affect their 5th and 8th great-grandchildren in such a way that we would be arguing about such a minutia, a tiny little thing, about hearing the story that you have a Cherokee princess in your family. Now, I'd like to stop right there and put out the disclaimer that I have never been told that I had a Cherokee princess in my family. But in my genealogical research, I can assure you beyond a shadow of a doubt that I do have ancestry from Virginia, and some of my great-grandmothers were called a princess of this tribe or that tribe by other people. So I can tell you that beyond a shadow of a doubt. I can show you on paper where they have been called that, and I know for a fact these are my family.
Right.
But growing up, I never heard the whole princess thing. A lot of people have, and that's okay to me. As a kid, I was very upset at the notion because I had a different idea about these kind of things. But today, as an adult, I'm not opposed to the notion. And the more common thing that you see is I had a Cherokee princess grandmother, or great-grandma, or Cherokee great-grandmother, or a Cherokee great-great-grandmother. Here in the South, that is not uncommon. I kid you not, Dr. Pullen, I've got on my phone right now today, one of the tabs that I have open is the complete list of 1817 Cherokee treaty recipients. And there are so many of them, like this one right here that says, in right of wife. Do you think that Samuel Riley left to move to Oklahoma when he was not Indian? Do you think his wife went to Oklahoma? Okay, this is a topic for another episode that I'm going to be doing in the near future. But the question that I have for you, like this whole ideology, whether it be negative or positive connotations about your Cherokee great-great-grandmother or narrative about a princess or what have you, what's the impact of this kind of message, and how does it shape how people see themselves?
Well,
what do you think?
In the genealogical world, there's a big business in tracing your ancestry back to George Washington or King whatever or Queen whoever, because that makes us feel important. And I think that's a part of this Cherokee grandmother business. We want to connect to important people. I see it in the Muskogee world, where they're, the notable leaders of the Muskogee people during the time of the European invasion. Everybody wants to have that person as their ancestor, because that person's in the history books, and that person makes them feel important. That comes out of human nature, one thing, and the other is the ill fit between a European royalty system and the Southeastern Native American tribal system. They don't fit. I mean, you can Miko, the title for that's usually translated in the Muskogee world as chief, is not a chief. A Miko is a Miko. It can be translated king, and then that puts you in the European invasion royalty system. Be better just to stick with Miko.
With Miko.
That's what it is. And you know, a chief is probably next best. In some of the anthropological literature, when they talk about the chiefs, they use the term big man or big woman, because the political structure is just not the same. A Miko did not have ultimate authority. A Miko just made suggestions and led by example. But once you overlay that, you know, the European royalty system onto it, that turns Miko into something that is part of the white world, not a part of the native world. Right. So the same thing with the prince, the prince or the princess, the king. It just doesn't fit the more informal structure of Southeastern Native American cultures. If a Miko gets the big head and decides that they're the ruler, the old women will put him out. I mean, he is not doing his job anymore.
That's right.
And they get somebody else who has a little more humility about him. Now, about the only place you ever really get, I think, a good European Native American fit in terms of leadership is war chief. When Muskogee people went to war, everybody else sat down, and the war chief was like a king, like the general. Well, we got to go and fight. You do this, and you do this, and you do this, and people left. But as soon as the war was over, he goes back, sits down, and
feels relieved.
Oh yes, yeah.
Yeah. Most people would think, well, he must be drunk with power. See, these are European ideas that we're struggling with. They would think that he must be drunk with power, and he's so glad that he has control. Look, it is not like that. There's so many of those concepts. Yeah, but I know from, I guess I would say, experiences and being in certain situations that I look forward to the day that I can set certain roles down.
Oh yes,
and just and just be a person. That'll be lovely. But you're absolutely right.
In my time as a Baptist preacher, which in the rural South was as close as you got to a Miko or a king, in that internal system.
Or maybe the war chief.
Yeah, maybe the war chief. Yeah, if you're a Baptist and you're crossed up with the Methodists, then that's
there you go. There you go.
Is war. But I never was attracted to having power over people, and because it was not a part of the rural Southern culture that I grew up in. It's very egalitarian. Even the biggest landowner with the most cows wore the same overalls as the guy who was scooping the manure out of the barn.
That's right.
And I think that as we get away from that idea of being us together for the good of all into a European notion of being me for myself and what's good for me, then we've gotten pretty far away from native culture.
Yeah. I definitely follow you there. There's a lot of those ideas, that you talk about how informal some of this kind of stuff is. That I've heard at a number of the Muskogee stomp dances I've attended. I've heard adults call young men who were very proud and who were very good at what they did. And I mean, when I say young men, I mean like toddlers, they would playfully call them Miko, and I don't see any problem with that. But if you say that to some people, they may get offended, and oftentimes I feel like the offense or the negativity or just even the whole, once again, revisiting that whole Cherokee princess connotation, I feel like that the negative ideas that we have about any of this stuff typically comes from the European, and I'm not saying that all natives, we used every part of the buffalo by any means.
Right.
A lot of the buffalo are dead at the bottom of that cliff.
Right. Right.
But people forget that. But anyway, we're not infallible. We had wars amongst our own people
Sure.
Before Europeans came over. But there are some conceptual ideas that we just don't get, like a king. There's some king on the other side of the world that's controlling what you people are doing to us right now. Well, how do I get to him? Is what my question is.
Yeah.
How do I find him?
Yeah.
But,
how does he know what's good for me sitting up there on the throne somewhere? But
exactly.
I think that the big conflict in my mind between the European way and the native way is the big emphasis in the native way is how can we be the best we can be together.
Sure.
And the European way is how can I be on the top of the pile, benefiting myself. And the big troubles that we have, I think, in our native world, our indigenous world, is when that me first idea trumps us first.
Right.
But in the indigenous world, us comes before me.
Sure. Yeah, I agree totally. And even at the level of the current head of a certain tribe, and being politically correct here, even at that level, I still see that same, that's the main issue, is that it's how am I going to do this and how is it going to benefit me, rather than the view of it helping the whole people. And certainly I know how they got into that situation with deep levels of intricity, but I still see that is absolutely 100% the problem.
Yeah.
We lose that whole sense of tribe. One of my favorite things outside of the Cherokee Nation's language place where I used to go drop my friend's son off at, I pick his son up from there because I was meeting him there so that their daughters could go and study Cherokee. But it's a big sign and stone out front that says it takes a tribe to raise a child, and that's absolutely true. And it's an idea that I wish that most people still had today. I think it would help us on a lot of levels.
Yep.
So speaking of that, recognition and belonging, what happens if somebody joins a tribe later in life, or perhaps just after learning about their heritage? Do you think that they face unique challenges trying to fit in or be accepted as part of that community?
I think they do. It's so much of cultural learning, as I mentioned with language earlier, is designed to be built in from birth. Some of it comes through genetic components, a readiness and an openness and a place for those kind of things to go. But I think it has more to do with the way you're raised. And if you don't have that, it's just a tremendous disadvantage. In my time in Oklahoma, one of the things I loved is, well, you mentioned stomp dancing and the little people, little guys, little babies. The grandparents would carry the children out in their arms, so that here were these children, babies in diapers that are in that stomp dance and seeing that fire reflected off those people going round and round, and hearing the shakers and the stomping of the feet and the songs. That's a part of them from the earlier than they even know. There's no way to replace that. One of my friends who made this journey said, "We will always be in kindergarten." That's the best we can ever hope for, is to be in kindergarten and absorb some of this. So it is a disadvantage, but you can't just give up and say, well, it's hopeless.
Yeah.
You learn what you can. You'll have to work harder. It won't come as easy. When I go to stomp dance, I find it very easy to be caught up in that energy that others are generating, but I find it very difficult to be a leader and help to generate that energy, because it's not in my bones. And I do it. I'm not a great dance leader, but as an elder, it's expected that you will do that. So I do it, but I'll never be good at it. But there are other people who can do that, and as a community, we can carry that. If you can become involved in a serious way in a community, even later in life, then the energy of the whole, the power, the spirit of that vital community can carry you to heights that you would never have reached if you didn't make the effort.
Yeah. I understand what you mean. And you had mentioned earlier about, being in like a sacred place and what have you.
Mm-hmm.
That's it's important, that we have some feeling of belonging in what it is that we identify as and what have you. And I remember my friend, I've still got his books on my table here. It's been a lot of reading, but Massaw Howard had spoke about that in his book and in the interview that I did with him a few months ago. And it's powerful stuff. I mean, right now, I know where some of my own family's their old stomp dance grounds were. I know where they're at, and I feel kind of let down because there's nobody that I can lead there to go use them.
Yeah. Right.
Nobody that I would have good faith and confidence in that would understand or care or what have you. So there's things like that even in the reverse is still true. You feel like there's something powerful there, but going to the site, are you yourself going to do it justice? Really, is what I think for myself.
Right.
But anyway, there are groups. Speaking of that duality, there are groups that will fit somebody in and make them feel comfortable and what have you. They may not necessarily be teaching them the right things or what have you, and they don't have the positive spirit that I see, for example, with your tribe and your group. You guys are definitely headed in the direction that I would be honored to show you my family stomp grounds, if you know what I mean.
Right.
But there are other people, and the opposite of that too, that are just headed in a bad direction.
Right.
It's unfortunate, but
so many things were broken. So much of Southeastern culture was just broken intentionally, and the government of the United States has continued to try to destroy native culture and native people, native religion, native spirituality, native identity. After 400 years of being under attack, no wonder that there are problems. But we can't live in that broken past. We have to imagine a wholeness somewhere down there in the future, and then do the hard work of making that happen. And I'm happy to hear you recognize, seeing what we're doing at Southeastern Mvskoke Nation, that we're making progress toward that. We've got a long way to go. We've got a lot to learn. I guess my association with Southeastern Mvskoke Nation goes back probably 15 years or so, where the leadership there realized that culture of the community was deficient. Or as he said, we really don't know anything. And but the leadership of the community at that time, I'd say at least 10 or 12, maybe 15 years ago, began to lay the foundation for having a legitimate cultural base and opening up to draw people in who felt attracted, and teaching, learning, practicing together. I'm sure we've made mistakes and we'll continue to make mistakes, but what we want is for our children and grandchildren to grow up in the culture and be able to carry it forward.
Yeah, that's honestly, that right there, Dr. Pullen, should be, in my opinion, what all Native people want. It really should be.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, there's a lot of them that are sitting in a stagnant culture that isn't alive, and which is what you guys have going on. Is your culture is alive. That is so important. But there's a lot of them that may be legit. They might even be in old Oklahoma, but they're just sitting there, and it's withering away or being eroded, even worse, by a lot of European ideas that are, destroying everything. Some of them I can tell you that even preach about trying to save their culture are doing the biggest thing in the world to destroy it right now. If they simply did this, they would find more help in helping to protect their culture than anybody else. But instead, they're doing this and this, and those two hand signs are not the way to gain friends. And I've seen it, and I had told Chief Michelle off camera about an instance of it that I think everybody in my beautiful state of Alabama here should know about. And I'll tell you about it when we get off camera again. But it's there. Yeah. They have said some things to try to help, but it's just not. It's not the main goal. The main goal is, so your grandmother was a Cherokee princess, or you're a this or that. And I'll be honest with you, I used words when I was a kid like wannabe and apple, and one of my favorite ones was rubber chicken shaman. I used to call all kinds of people names. But
and many of them
I've grown out of that.
Deserve that. Many of them deserve that. Well, in the world I grew up in, there was the idea of the gun-shy dog, a hunting dog that had been shot and were shy of guns, and so Native people are reasonably suspicious of the supposed good intentions. Well, as my daddy said, if somebody says, I just want to help you out, he said, put your hand over your pocketbook and run. And so I understand that some of this hostility is reasonable and well placed, but you can't build a future on hostility and on crabs in the bucket pulling everybody else down.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
We have to help each other so that everybody's success benefits everyone.
Right.
That is not the American way. It's the Native American way, but it's not the American way.
Yeah, I understand what you mean. Well, speaking of tribal politics and identity, and going a step further, identity politics, if a person is disenrolled or removed from their tribe, which you rarely hear this from federal tribes. It's usually state tribes that you hear this about. But if a person's disenrolled or removed from their tribe, maybe even for political reasons, and I'm not going to get into examples of those political reasons, but are they still Native?
Well, of course they are. I have to say, when my membership card came in the mail from Southeastern Mvskoke Nation, there was my picture There was my roll number. I felt good. I really, I tried not to get too attached to that element, but as people, we want to belong and we want to be accepted and affirmed, and that was very affirming. Mm-hmm. And if for some reason they kicked me out, well, that would break my heart. But that is just a piece of plastic.
That's right.
Your identity is something that's in your soul. It's in your being, and nobody can touch that unless you allow it to be touched.
Right.
And if you were too much in love with that piece of plastic and that ability to say, well, I'm a member of a recognized tribe, then that gives people power over something that should be personal and spiritual and soulful. So if Southeastern Mvskoke Nation, for some reason, decided that I had to go, that would be difficult, but it wouldn't change. It wouldn't change who I am. We have people in our community who, for one reason or another, were removed from another tribe or made to feel so unwelcome that they left. We've had people leave us and go to other places because they no longer felt comfortable with directions that things were going in, and that's a part of the human experience. We and our ancestors had that same experience of relocating. Maybe moved from a Muskogee to a Shawnee community because they thought things were going a little better for the Shawnee than they were for the Muskogee.
Sure.
Or leave Muskogee community and go to Seminole community, and probably wasn't a whole lot of leaving Muskogee and going to Cherokee because of that antipathy between those groups. But if your identity is rooted inside yourself instead of out there in some political structure that is giving you maybe even a false sense of legitimacy, then if the political winds change, that doesn't change who you are. You may just have to find a different group of people to practice community in.
Sure. It's amazing that you mentioned that, because I was speaking to a non-native person about this exact same thing some months ago. I barely even remember where it was at, but I remember the conversation. And they're like, well, you mean you can leave your tribe and join another tribe? I didn't know that was possible. I'm like, yeah. I mean, when you come from a multi, I don't want to say racial because Native American is considered a race, but when you come from multicultural Native tribes, multiple groups, and if you're legitimately related to this one or that one, you could be members of either one. Now, for the most part, you're not allowed to be members of both.
Right.
There is a little written legality about that, which seems kind of silly to me, because once again, coming from multiple Native ancestry myself, it seems kind of silly that you couldn't be a member of both. But that kind of thing happens. I was really shocked to meet people in Oklahoma when we lived there in Tahlequah. We lived in Park Hill, actually, which is outside of Tahlequah, but I worked in kind of in between the both. But while we were there, I was shocked to meet Cherokee people that were mixed with Sioux. I thought that never happened. Mm-hmm. I thought, well, it's just a random, my mom's dad was in the military back in the early 1900s, and he traveled around, and she decided to move to Alabama, where she met my dad, or actually I think they met in Northwest Florida, right on the cusp of Alabama. But I was shocked that other people had any such similar experiences. It seemed odd to me, but it happens, and not only that, but going back, just as you had mentioned just a moment ago, if a person that was a member of the Muskogee decided that they wanted to join this tribe or that tribe back in the old days, it really wasn't that, people could see each other for who they were a lot more than those hidden intentions or illegitimate intentions. Mm-hmm. Although, as I believe, if I didn't mention in Michelle's interview, I mentioned in the interview before Chief Gilmore, I've got a copy of a document that was written by Andrew Jackson. It's a handwritten note that says Sam Houston can be considered from now on Cherokee Indian. Mm-hmm. That's what he's considered from. It's a handwritten permission slip. I've seen that on Sam Houston's Wikipedia page. Once again, not putting them cousins down, not at all, but I admire the fact that he was so well taken into the Cherokee communities that, they accepted him. I mean, my 5th or 6th great granddad adopted him as his son, and that should have been good enough. Mm-hmm. But, down the road, you have to have this piece of paper that says that you're Indian. But,
well, I think tribal. Our ancestors had they were not closed communities in the sense that, they had a list of the people who were in and a list of the people who were out. And there was intermarriage and adoptions. White people were taken in who were attracted to the culture and they took up that way of life, and so they got married to native people and got names and learned languages and all of that, and that's sure. I think a big part of the problem of native identity in our culture is the management of native identity was taken up by the government of the United States as one more tool of oppression. And so if we allow the invaders to define who we are, then it shouldn't be surprising that creates problems for us internally in our cultures. Yeah. One of my teachers, I asked, it was a group in North Florida that took me in and got me started. And I asked early on, well, are you federally recognized? And he cursed and said, no, we're not federally recognized. In fact, we have never signed any treaties with the government of the United States. As far as I'm concerned, we're still at war with the United States of America. But they could do that because they were a small group hidden away. Our ancestors didn't have that option. They signed the papers or were slaughtered. And so that makes it, questions of identity are very, very tangled up in the history of the oppression and the battles and the culture conflict between the European and the native culture.
Sure. I think that we need some kind of healing for everybody. I mean, everybody. Because I will tell you this is something that I've been working on another side project, as I have so many side projects, but something that bothers me in my life is that a white person or a black person specifically can say that they're white or black in the United States, and that's it. Mm-hmm. A native person, you have to prove who your great-great-great-great-great-great-grandma was. Mm-hmm. And it's easier for me to tell the lie and say that I'm a white person than it is for me to tell the truth and say that I'm native. It's healing that I personally have had to go through that for me was a long journey, because once again, my situation's a little bit more complicated, than a lot of people's, but it's a healing that I think everybody needs to go through. Right. I think black people, white people, whatever culture. When I was taking, I told you I studied Mandarin Chinese. One of the young ladies in my Chinese class was from Fujian province, and she grew up speaking English here in the United States. Her family was first generation, and so her family was Fujian province, which was one of the last great aristocracies of China before the Manchurian and even the Mongolian takeover. I think they were before that, but anyway, she was proud of who she was because she had these stories of her childhood, knowing that her family, a very tight group, were Fujian and not, everybody else. And even my Chinese teacher, she was from Taiwan, but she was very, while being proud of who she was, very accepting of her own culture. I mean, the fact that an Indian kid was studying Chinese in her class, which was mostly Chinese kids in her class, but she was really great encouragement for me to study her people's language. But I was studying her the whole time because she was much older at the time, and I seen how well adjusted she was to being of so many different cultures. As a matter of fact, some of her family, if I recall, grew up in Japan, and so she had all these things going on, but she knew who she was. She was from Taiwan, which was her. And to me, growing up later on down the road, knowing more about Asian people and spending up so much time and especially in Chinese culture, I understood that, I could recognize her as being from Taiwan. But she always talked about how she wasn't this and wasn't that. And she wasn't from Beijing because everybody in Beijing pronounced their R's funny.
Yeah.
So, and coincidentally, and like I said, it wasn't my only language. I have a tendency to pronounce, even in English, my R's like I'm from Beijing, which is hilarious. But it's not something that a lot of people would pick up.
I took a language course early along that was sponsored by a native college in Oklahoma, and there were about 8 people in the class. I was the only non-speaker. The rest were speakers who were taking the class so that they could learn to write in Muskogee.
Okay.
Well, it was fascinating because our teacher would introduce a word, and then we'd have to stop, and the 7 students would have to say, "Oh, this is how we say it in our tribal town. This is how we say it in our tribal town. This is how," and that was really a rich experience for me. It was hard for me. It didn't help me in wanting to learn to speak Muskogee because now I had 7 options of how to say it. But that reminded me that there was never a Muskogee Nation, even in the sense that the United States of America could be considered a nation. It was just a loose collection of more or less alike people, and if that's the Muskogee experience, then you go to Choctaw, Chickasaw, Cherokee, Shawnee, all. There was a tremendous diversity of culture, of language, of belief, and of practice, and we're always going to have that. We're not going to be able to create some monolithic, even Muskogee culture or Cherokee culture.
Sure. So I guess in summing up about healing, through this identity, I think that maybe if we learn to accept others for who they are, and accept there are differences in our peoples. I mean, even I've experienced that whole language situation in Cherokee. One group will say one word for the number 12, and the other group says a whole different word. And those languages, it has been historically documented, were different from clan to clan. And just like the Lakota, Nakota, Dakota, Lakota people speak, 4 different dialects of Sioux. It's basically the same idea. We were probably more or less one group of people that had just a bunch of different ideas and different languages, and unfortunately, that's the one part. People that are trying to gain something about their own personal identity, if they could accept this one idea that I have, I think it may help them. That we probably were all one group of people who had a bunch of different ideas and disagreed and fought amongst their own. And then when this other culture came over, that culture needed to say that they didn't overthrow this one group. They overthrow this group because they did this group because they did that. And this group actually fought in the Civil War on their behalf, but that let's just say that we don't like them and send them to Oklahoma, and so on and so on and so on. And it's a hard thing. It's difficult. It's a long road, and one that I admire and condone. Anybody who can, heal and realize who it is that they are. And I've even in my flute business, as I mentioned on occasion, I've even got customers in other countries that I know probably, and I say probably because you never know 100% of anything, but probably don't have any Native American ancestry. However, they identify with Native American culture for XYZ reason. And in my opinion, as long as they're not trying to lead others in an obscure direction, and they're getting some healing out of it, just in that I have said, I don't feel like there's anything negative. I think that's a good thing.
Well, diversity is a good thing, and if we can focus on having some unity, because we can embrace diversity, that will take us a whole lot further than trying to enforce some kind of sameness that everybody has to be like this. And as a leader at Southeastern Mvskoke Nation, one of my they probably get tired of hearing me say it, but I'm not real big on a bunch of rules and regulations and telling people that this is how you have to do it. I mean, you're not dancing right, you're not singing right, you're not praying right. Who am I to say that? Now, it is important that we know our culture's ways and our history, and there's some things that that we really is important to do it right. But for the most part, we can embrace the diversity that people bring. I think our ancestors like songs. If they heard a Cherokee song they liked, they just bring it right to the next stomp dance. And there's nobody standing there and say, oh, no, you can't sing that song. That's not right.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I think, Dr. Pullen, that's a great way to end this episode. I can't thank you enough for being here and having this conversation with me. I hope that the viewer, of course, has gotten as much out of it as I have, at least, or maybe even more, because it is certainly appreciated. Your time, your knowledge, your wisdom are greatly appreciated. And of course, thanks for helping us think deeply about Native identity. It's not just something that's written on paper. It's something that's lived, felt, carried with us. Identity is never as simple as black and white. For Native people especially those with mixed heritage or who are rediscovering their roots, it can be a journey of reclamation and resilience, and sometimes conflict, as we discussed. But as we heard today, being Native isn't only about who you're enrolled with or who signs your card. It's about a connection, that community, and carrying forward traditions and stories that often, tries to erase them. So thanks so much for joining us, Dr. Pullen. I appreciate it. Thanks the viewer, of course, for spending this time with us as well. And we hope to see you again really soon.